here. I love you all.
Hello and welcome to the Scannain Podcast, your weekly look at the world of film news, Irish and international. I'm Darren Mooney, joining me are...
Jay. And Ronan.
And we're going to talk about what we normally do. We're going to talk about the week in film news, the top 10, and the new releases. But we're going to start with what we normally do. What have we watched this week? So, what have you watched this week, Ronan?
This week I have watched a bunch of things. So, I don't know if anyone has seen any films by Bertrand Mandico, a French filmmaker.
I've never even heard of him.
His film The Wild Boys was named by Cahiers du Cinema as the best of last year.
Is it as good as Twin Peaks: The Return, that classic film?
Yeah, you know, Cahiers like to go for a sort of always
idiosyncratic.
Yeah. Yes, that's the diplomatic term, I believe. I never did manage to see The Wild Boys. Heard great things about it. Loosely based, I think, on the William Burroughs novel, of which I'm a big fan. So when Apocalypse After, his latest film, which is about 40 minutes long, came to movie, I dove in, was delighted to try it out, and it is utter rubbish. Utterly and completely. It's this sort of metafilm tale of a director who's making this weird, eccentric sci-fi, and it keeps pulling back. And are you watching the film? Are you not watching the film? There are weird aliens vomiting all over the place. It's got real artistic sensibilities. It thinks it's a really artsy trash film, but it's often got all the grace of something like the Roger Corman alien knockoff Galaxy of Terror. It's really not good at all. And it's that kind of annoying trash cinema that thinks it's better than trash. And there's nothing wrong with being trash.
Andy.
Trash is...
Excuse me, sorry, something in my throat.
Totally with you on this one. There's nothing wrong with being trash. Trash is a huge amount of fun, but don't have these weird pretensions about trash that you have to dress it up in this sort of metafilmic conceits. It's nonsense. It did not start my week well. I still want to check out The Wild Boys because it might well be great.
I'm less inclined after this conversation.
It's a hard sell. Man.
I mean, the thing is, it's about 36 minutes long. It's insufferable. I wanted to turn it off almost immediately.
What?
Yeah. It's
half of Arda.
Mm-hmm.
And you wanted to turn it
I
off.
wanted to turn it off within about 5 minutes. I was just like, no, I can't do this. Because sometimes you can tell. You can tell it's not going to get better. And it didn't, dear reader. It did not. Luckily, things got a lot better from there because I rewatched a childhood favourite that I haven't seen since childhood. Matilda. Danny DeVito's.
Yeah.
Which, you know what, is great.
It's a delight. I watched it last year.
So good.
It's really fun.
We had this on VHS when I was a kid, and I remember there were distinct parts of it that were rendered unwatchable because we had sort of been through it so many times. And I had no idea how it would stand up. Most of the things I used to watch as a kid all the time, Land Before Time, Naked Gun for some reason, I've revisited in subsequent years and found like they stand up. But, you know, sometimes things don't necessarily. So I wasn't entirely sure how this would go. And it's really, really good. It captures Dahl better than memory would have suggested. I think he's an interesting author in that very few adaptations of his work are alike at all. Yeah. You have, say, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory,
The Witches.
James and the Giant Peach, The Witches. They're all extremely difficult, but all quite good. You can get a lot of different things out of Dahl adaptations without there, you know, being any compromise in quality, unless you go to something like SEO Trot, which was dreadful. Did you see that? The Dustin Hoffman...
No.
Judi Dench. Oh, it's dreadful. BBC television production, New Year's Eve or something. Not good at all.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, this really stood up more than I expected to be honest. There's a bit of slightly hokey camera work, you know, really slow-mo stuff. But mostly, DeVito's having a lot of fun here. And there's a really sweet thing that I had kind of forgotten about, you know, being alone and hiding yourself in books, and it's really nice.
Wilson's a delight.
She really is. She's absolutely terrific here. Got such screen presence.
Is it just me, or has DeVito not directed as much as you might have thought? I know he did, obviously, back in the 80s. He did, like, War of the Roses and stuff like that. He did this.
I was a big fan of Death to Smoochie, which came out a few years ago, which it tanked big time. Like, has he done anything since? I'm not sure. But I always hope he would, because I think he's a very idiosyncratic director. Like, he does his own thing, and that's it. And you get a DeVito movie, no matter what material you think he's going to, you give him to do. Like, he has a very unique sensibility and very interesting kind of kind of even the visuals and stuff are really interesting. He throws the camera around a bit as well. You always want to see more. I don't know if he's done that since Death to Smoochie. I would hope so.
And that's exactly it. I think here, obviously as a kid, I wasn't really taking in the directorial choices, but watching it now, I'm kind of thinking, he's not just, this isn't just a star sort of saying, I want a chance behind the camera. It's him really deciding how to convey information visually, and obviously it worked really well on a child audience. And of course that thing where you revisit movies you loved as a kid where there are jokes that completely flew over your head, like, Moby, what? And wait, Matilda's mother is saying, "Oh yeah, I've never looked back since I got mine waxed on the phone." It is packed with brilliant stuff, and as always with Dahl adaptations, it's weird. It's weird and strange in a way that you never do question as a child. I had a lot of fun with this. This was probably my film highlight of the week, revisiting this. Then on Sunday morning, I went to the Lighthouse for a big screen presentation of The Farthest, the Emma Reynolds documentary, which I managed to miss when it came out. Unforgivable, really. It's really good.
It's stunning.
Yeah,
Visually
really
amazing.
enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Really impressive the way that it combines that sort of excuse me, scientific accuracy and, accurately presenting everything from the Voyager mission with these visuals that are at times reminiscent of something like Doug Trumbull's work on 2001. You have these sort of swirling, cascading space visualizations. I really enjoyed it for what is a talking head documentary. It never feels like that.
It's a good one. It's a superior version of that. You can do, which you can do. There's a cliched kind of documentary structure format that can be done very well.
Yep. Yeah.
It's remarkable to say that about talking head documentary, but it's one of those see it in a cinema if you can sort of things.
It really is, yeah. This really, really works on a big screen. And that was the thing, once I missed it in the cinema while I was out on original release, I kind of thought, I almost don't want to see it on TV. I want to have my chance back. So I was glad that I did. It's really, really brilliantly edited.
Quite moving as well.
Makes it zip along. And there's that kind of sense of, these people working. They're talking, I think... It's a little hand-holding in the way it talks about the idea of working on something that will exist beyond the threshold of, humanity. It tells you that a little more than I'd like at times. But there is absolutely that to it. And especially it's coming from the people interviewed in the film. It's not Reynolds forcing
What I liked about what I found specifically moving about it was the very idea of something drifting out past kind of
the edge of what's known.
Yeah, what's known. There's something oddly kind of hopeful about that in terms of what we can do, and something sad about it that we'll never know probably anything more than that. And I think the documentary gets it that well. I think even the people thing I can take on it. I absolutely agree, accept that. Yeah, but I think it gets it and it shows that. And I think that's why a big screen experience works in that regard for it.
Well, it's one of those interesting things where it's talking about our sort of profound isolation in the solar system and the universe and beyond, and the fact that, as far out as we get, and every day the Voyagers get further out to the furthest reaches humanity has ever got, still they talk about the utter improbability of ever encountering anything because there's just so much empty space. Sitting in a cinema surrounded by people yet alone, it kind of does something with that, and it's really fascinating. I enjoyed that one a lot. Mubi at the moment is doing a retrospective on a French documentarian called Jean Rouch, who I hadn't heard of. He's an ethnographer working a couple of decades, but his work really kind of caught on in the 50s. They have a few of his things that they're sort of gradually releasing at the moment. I checked out the two earliest ones they have. The first is called The Mad Masters, and it's a short documentary about this sort of religious group that's sprung up in, I think it's Niger, in response to colonialism. It's the British were there at the time. It's really, really odd. It's one of those things that I had no idea how I felt about it. So there's really detailed, intense footage of this group of people who are possessed by spirits and then reenact the sort of military possessions of the British occupiers. And they're kind of taking the piss. They're mocking these people who've come in, taken over their society. It's it's strange in the way the 50s ethnography often is, in that it's really exoticized gaze. There's a sort of French voiceover narration that is sort of like, oh, look at these people who aren't civilized. It's not quite that, it's not looking down on them in any kind of way, but it's sort of inbuilt to the way that it structures the story.
Almost.
Yeah, absolutely. That it's it's very much for a white audience back home, but it's fascinating. Yeah, it's extremely rare.
You're talking
kind
about
of
historical
footage.
artifact to some degree now, aren't you? Like,
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
so you can approach it that way. I think.
Yeah. It's kind of remarkable to remind yourself this was 6 decades ago.
Yeah.
It's really disturbing, some of the footage, because they're all foaming at the mouth, frothing, running around, moving their limbs in really strange ways, and claiming to be possessed. They may be off their minds on some sort of drugs. Really, really odd. But you also think they're, taking the piss out of the colonial occupiers. Are they also taking the piss out of Rouge as he films? Hard to say. It's really, really fascinating. Worth checking out if you're interested in that kind of ethnographic film. And Rouge, again, hadn't heard of him, but a pioneer in this field, judging by what I'm reading, the stuff that Mubi has put up alongside it. It is kind of a strange, tough watch. Not as much so is the other film they've put up from around the same period, Mammy Water, which is shot in Ghana and has
Homestead, Darren.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a lot of footage of a sort of sacrifice to the sea in this procession festival. It's a lot more typical observational ethnography. Again, a French voiceover that's a little overt in its Western perspective, which you would expect, something from the mid-50s. Fascinating as well, and a little less disturbing, though. Much mutilation of animals again. Sticking with French, continuing the Jacques Tati retrospective with Monsieur Monsieur Hulot's Holiday, which I hadn't seen. It's the only one of the Hulot films I hadn't seen before. The first one, and it kind of feels, in a way, it's great. It's really funny, entertaining, great visual comedy, but it feels like a bit of a test run. That's that's part of seeing it after the later, more famous ones. But it doesn't have their sort of
Finesse.
their finesse, their visual expanse. It hasn't quite figured out how to bring that breed of comedy to the big screen yet, as you would in playtime. But it's really funny. It's Monsieur Hello, or I keep calling him Monsieur Hello. We'll call him that. That works. Hulot, I think.
Hulot.
He arrives at the seaside, and
He has a fire documentary coming out this week, I believe. Everybody does.
Indeed.
He arrives at the seaside and just causes mayhem with all these sort of typical silent throwback gags, hitting people with poles that he doesn't realise are sticking out of the back of his arm, that sort of stuff. It's really good fun.
I like that kind of stuff, though. I'm sucker for that kind of thing.
It's fantastically entertaining.
If only there was something in the top 10 this week that would maybe tap into that.
We will talk about that later, Darren.
All right.
Anon. Then on TV the other night, I caught up with another recent Irish documentary
You
that
watch
I had.
TV?
I know, right? That I specifically for this that I shamelessly missed, which was Katie, which I like. It's really good. It's really interesting in that this is not in any way a natural protagonist. She is extremely reticent, and the film discusses how she doesn't really like the spotlight very much, and she doesn't give away much to the filmmakers here. It makes it really fascinating because they have to sort of rely on their visual sensibilities to get to grips with her character, which they do very well. It's a pretty typical structure as these kind of sports documentaries go. It follows the sort of path of her career, the triumphs, the sort of drawbacks. As somebody with no interest whatsoever in sport boxing, I brought nothing to it. I didn't know anything about her besides the fact that people love her and she's the best Irish sports person ever.
It wasn't tailor-made for you then, no?
No, you cannot say that. And I feel like you would get more out of it the more you bring to it.
Yeah, I'd be a big fan, so I'm very much looking forward to watching next day.
I think you like quite a bit.
It is worth noting for listeners, it is still on the iPlayer, on the RT player.
Yeah.
Which is where I'll probably be watching it, actually.
And it's good. It sort of zips along. She's very engaging, even if she does sort of put up this buffer, which kind of is what makes it fascinating. It's when you get more into the narrative or trajectory that I was less interested. The time that you spend with her in her home, there's a really charming scene where she's cooking a meal and she kind of admits that she has no idea how to cook, and I'm sort of watching horrified as she's going in with this raw chicken. There's a lot of little amusing bits like that, and she's quite charming. It's definitely well worth seeking it. And you don't have to seek very far because it's on the
RT player. Oh.
And finished off my week with Wim Wenders' film on Mubi, a documentary called A Trick of the Light, which is this documentary about a German pioneer, or indeed pioneers, three brothers, the Scannain brothers, working in Berlin in 1895, who I hadn't heard of before. They came up with a projection system called the bioscope. Which, essentially an early film, an early version of cinema projection. And then they went along to Paris and saw the Lumiere brothers and thought, well, they did that better. And that was sort of the end of them. Wenders was teaching in Munich at the time, so he sort of co-directed this with a whole class of students. And it's really fascinating. It's about an hour and a quarter long. It starts with about a 20-minute section, all shot in black and white, with Udo Kier playing the main one of the Scannain brothers, narrated by his daughter as a child. So it's this sort of interesting, aping the style of silent cinema. It's quite nicely done, but then it shoots forward to the modern day, where the daughter, who is at the time of filming 95, she must be over 100 by my count. And there's a lengthy interview with her about her father, and it is absolutely delightful. She's the most wonderful screen presence. But Wenders and his students are doing something weird here, where they shoot it almost as a comedy about them shooting it. So they have a shot of her talking, and then they'll cut to a reverse shot of them filming her. And then to somebody leaning against the window looking in, which is aping one of the films that you've seen earlier, because they have a couple of sections from the Scannain brothers films. It's really structurally strange, and I kind of appreciate it. He's doing something very odd with not just making a straight documentary about here's this person you've never heard of, here's what they did, good night. Really playing around with the form, and in many ways messing with the ideas of how cinema has come along in the 100 years since. It doesn't always work. It's a bit gimmicky and silly and twee, but it's sweet. And there's a really lovely section. The credits are about 20 minutes long, because they start and then they cut back to the young Miss Skladnowski, or, well, she was young, she's quite old by the time they film her, who is just like looking at these pictures they've made of Udo Kier as her father, and is like, yeah, looks okay, but it's not very accurate, is it? I mean, you did an okay job, it's fine, it'll do for the film, whatever. She's very, very charming, funny. And then the credits sort of go on very slowly, keep cutting back to things, and at one point it says the end, unless you want to watch more. And they put on some of the old films. It's lovely.
Oh.
Yeah, I enjoyed this a lot. And it has a lovely thing at the start where Wenders' credit is Ein Lichtspiel von Wim Wenders, which is a light play from Wim Wenders. Very sweet. That was me.
All right then. So Jay, what have you watched this week?
Quite a bit, as per usual.
You do have the advantage of not being in work.
Yeah, at the moment, but we'll see.
Jealous.
I took a...
This is why you don't have Christmas holidays, to be clear.
I took a recommendation from Ronan and watched Brief Encounter, which I had somehow never seen. In one of those kind of... I mean, if we all sit down and put a list together of films we haven't seen, that everybody going, how have you not seen that? It'd be quite lengthy, but this is one of these ones that's just inexplicably.
I imagine that was the reaction last week, as I recall.
Yeah,
when Ronan brought it up.
So I said, to my shame, I thought I'll watch it, and it's amazing. It's as amazing as people say it is, as Ronan says it is, as various people have said.
You can count on Ronan for a good recommendation.
Indeed,
the most wonderful thing.
It's Celia Johnson and Trevor Howard are incredible together. Incredible. Yeah. Like, this is your... Like, this film casts a long shadow. Your Before Midnights, your Before Trilogy, Bridges of Madison County, all sorts of things. And even in terms of structurally, really interesting in that regard. This really, really... And it's like to do a film in kind of basically the end of the war kind of time of two people who are married meeting up and kind of hooking up to some certain degree.
As Ronan pointed out, it was banned by the Irish censor.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. In some ways, it's quite kind of racy in that regard, I guess, certainly for its time.
But without ever indulging it.
No.
There's a sort of underlying sexiness to it. That
the restraint helps a lot.
Yeah,
it makes it extremely...
It's all in the performance, the way they look at each other, the way they don't touch each other.
It's extremely sensual in that regard, and those small little train station rooms and... The wonderful woman that works there.
That little side story of her and the
amazing.
station master is
it's incredible.
Excellent.
It's like a mini version of it. And the film is heartbreaking towards the end, and it does the thing that Carol does, actually, which I noticed. At the start of Carol, you see a scene with Kate Blanchett and Rooney Mara where she kind of touches her shoulder and walks away, but you only find out what that scene is about later on. And it does that kind of thing. And it's like, again, just cast a long shadow. This film is pretty extremely influential. You can feel it. That, it's pretty, if not written the rules, certainly laid down certain ground rules for a lot of films that followed.
Carol is very specifically pointing to Brief Encounter.
Very much so. Very much so.
It's a beautiful little reference, actually.
It really is. No, it absolutely is. It's that kind of look of somebody's face, and then you find out why, and so on and so forth. It's really lovely. The music is gorgeous in it. Everything about it is that kind of wistful time and a kind of era of kind of where you have to silently take it. Where you can't live your life in the way that you want to. Yeah. And it's all the more devastating, I suppose, in that regard, because there's no way out, tragically and sadly and wherever, and it makes it ultimately extremely devastating. It's unbelievably beautiful, and it's one of those ones that I kind of found myself thinking about and thinking, I'm going to watch that again soon, I think, just to kind of dig into it a little more.
There is a Valentine's Day screening in the NCH.
So I heard.
All over. It will be the second time seeing it live with live score.
Good Lord.
I love this film.
Oh, no doubt. I also rewatched The Little Stranger, Lenny Abronson's film, and if possible, I liked it more the second time.
I think stranger things have happened.
But indeed, this is such a weird, decaying chamber piece. Like, I can describe it. It's haunted by everything. Like, this film is haunted by the house, by class, by wherever, and all the usual kind of stuff that you kind of get out of it. But on rewatch, it kind of has this really dreadful obviousness to it that what's going to happen is going to happen, because that's just the way it is. Nobody's going to leave. Nobody's going to change their life. So we're all stuck at this place, and this place will be the ruin of us all. And this place is literally the ruin of them all. But the inevitability of it kind of really comes through in the second rewatch, or first rewatch of it, and it makes it kind of more tragic and sadder and weirder. And in a year where I'm not that fussed about nearly all the Oscar films, this really, really should be in the mix. In that regard, it kind of has everything going for it. I'm amazed it hasn't.
And it's exactly the kind of film the Oscars would in the past have been very comfortable including.
Exactly, it's that. I think it's really that good. And I look forward to watching it more and more as the years go on. I think it's one of those films that will stand the test of time. How high a level, I don't know, but it's very good.
There are a small cohort of people, I remember, as soon as it was released in the States, who were kind of like, don't sleep on this, and I've sort of been quietly cheerleading for it since.
Yeah.
And
I'm glad
I think that's going to grow over the years.
I think so. I think
great.
I remember reading. I think I said at the time when Abramson gave an interview, I think, to one of the news sites in the States about it, and he said, you know what kind of film you're going to get, right? You're not getting into what you're getting my film. Like this way you're giving me the thing to do, because he delivers films that are his own kind of thing, and Abramson, wherever about him, he makes his own films, and that's that. And this is one of these ones that's clearly fallen between two stools for audiences, and to some degree,
for the company releasing it.
Yeah, they just didn't quite know what to do with it. It's kind of a tragedy, really, because it has all the ingredients to have done a lot better about it at the box office, which I think it did okay, and didn't it? Relatively okay. Better than I think initially was.
Well, then people were sort of expecting.
It seems to have done reasonably well here.
They should have done big business.
I mean, it's so Ward's strategy was a huge part in that. It didn't do that well at sort of festivals.
It didn't get launched at festivals, did it? It was supposed to be didn't get.
It didn't do the circuit in the same way that Oscar movies or awards fair movies tend to have to do these days. But in terms of. It has a startlingly low IMDb rating, which will surprise absolutely nobody, which is obviously not a metric for this sort of thing. Relatively lukewarm reviews, 64% at the 64% of Rotten Tomatoes, as such as you know,
As a
much
measure
as
of
things
anything,
matter.
like,
Yep, 1.8 million earned at the US box office, so probably not
That's
that
not
much.
good.
That's not...
Domestic, no, in total, that's including the international draw. The domestic total gross for it was 700,000, which
pretty
is
good. That's
700,000.
For Ireland? Or
No,
America?
no,
for America.
for America.
Jesus,
like,
okay.
Lord.
Not great
That's
Yeah.
tanking.
at all. That's a pity. It's a real pity.
It's a real shame, but I suppose it means in the years to come it will be sort of
the good
held
will
up
be
as
out.
this forgotten.
The 272nd most successful movie of 2018 in the US
That's
box
gone on
office.
the DVD cover, I presume.
Yeah.
I can probably name 271 films worse than it released
Indeed.
last year.
I took another Ronan recommendation actually after I watched A Town Called Panic, which is bizarrely wonderful. This is I think a 70-something minute long French animation that I could try and describe what happens, but there'd be no point.
Nobody would
No
believe you.
justice. Yeah, it's just a chaos filled anarchic delight. It's madness. It's just basically it's stop motion animation cast of characters including Mr. Horse, Indian Cowboy, and Stephen next door, who was my absolute MVP. He's amazing. Everything is at an intensity of 10.
Stephen speaks at a constant volume of
It's
11.
And it's just endlessly inventive, rip-roaring chaos at every turn. But it does have a structure. It does have that kind of thing where, you know, where films descend into anarchy, people think, there's no real structure to this, but it's very carefully planned out, and you can tell. But my God, the animation is incredible. The characters are insane. And I just laughed and laughed at the situations.
It's ridiculous. I just love the way it launches from a situation where they want to build a barbecue, so order 100 bricks, is it?
No, they wanted to buy, I think it was 500 bricks or 50 bricks.
Yeah.
And you put a cup of tea down the computer where you press the button and just kept adding zeros, and they ordered 50 million bricks. So they hid them for the birthday party, put them on the roof. So it's just sitting on top of the house with a big like
the house sinks into the depths of the earth.
It's insane. That's where it kicks off from. That's your basic plot point.
That's the first.
Everything just extends to the weirdness of that. Then they rebuild and the house is stolen and all that. It's just insane. The visual gags and the weird asides are just delirious and strange. And it's about as great as 77 minutes you'll get. And like, this is the kind of thing I could see Netflix just kind of buying everybody and just saying, listen, just make me 10 seasons of this, because I've watched this over and over and over.
It is wildly inventive.
It is,
and just
it's
such
great.
fun stop motion animation, and knows that it's kind of quite hokey, so you often get people who'll be very much displaced from one frame to the next.
It's just
and it plays with that.
bonkers.
God, it's terrific. I think, well, we're now at the point, it was a full 10 years ago, but I think it's one of my favourite comedies of the last long number of years.
I can see that. I could see where exactly it fit in. And weirdly, it has quite a few fans on Twitter as well. Because I'd never heard of it, and then a few people came back to me and said, it's amazing, I love that.
Yeah.
People come out of woodworks like, oh, it's great. Like, I just either had forgotten about it or just hadn't seen it in a while or whatever. It was
There
a
are
great scene.
dozens of us.
There are
Literally dozens.
I also watched a film called Nancy, which is a really interesting film starring Andrew Riseborough.
This is the one. Yes, it was released in the States.
I don't think it was a Sundance film and not a Sundance film, though. Thankfully,
yeah. But I mean, it was one of those films that I think tried to gain traction. You were talking about, for example, there was another one. Mandolin's Mandolin was another one as well.
Mandolin's Mandolin. Yeah, exactly. That got a bit more traction in terms of award circuit. Remember, this is more of a. This is a really interesting piece. Riseborough plays this woman called Nancy, who becomes kind of increasingly convinced that she might have been kidnapped.
As a child.
She's living with her mother, played by the brilliant Anne Dowd. And the cast is just incredible. Anne Dowd, and her mother dies quite early on. It's not really a spoiler. And she has these weird things. She has this temp job, and she tells people about her holidays that she went to the Democratic Republic of North Korea on the holidays, and they're showing people pictures, and they're kind of like, I'll buy this, I guess. And it's like, she's eerily convincing. So you know something's not quite right. I don't believe that she was in North Korea. It's not explicitly stated that she wasn't, but it adds to a sense of unease about it. And she sees this thing on the TV. It's like 30th anniversary of a child that went missing, and Steve Buscemi and I can't think of her name. She's the Kenneth Lonergan's wife who was in Rectify. I can't think of her name. I'll look it up now. Are the parents
J. Smith Cameron?
That's the one. Yeah, that's her. Are the parents who kind of just, they do a composite sketch of what she looked like now, and Andrew Riseborough's convinced that it's her. or is she convinced that's her? So she kind of prints out the thing on a colour copy and holds it up to half her face, which is the poster you see, the kind of thing with the thing. And she goes to visit him. And that's the basically central thing of it. It's extremely chilly and quite disturbing kind of film in a very restrained and controlled and quiet way. Really, extremely well made. Riceburg is magnificent. She's probably one of the best actors in the world at the moment.
Yeah.
She's incredible. Even in material, she elevates material all the time. And there's a lot of good work on in here. So,
Like Mandy.
well, she's probably the best thing in it, quite frankly, and doesn't get enough screen time. But she's great here. She has this kind of fragile blankness to her that you can't quite tell whether she's playing these people who are still kind of grieving, or certainly the reintroduction of grief with the possibility that she might be their daughter.
Yeah.
So do you get a detective them up and take this DNA samples from the three of them, and you have to wait a day or I think a day to get the results. So she kind of spends time with them, and it kind of asks questions about kind of where people belong, who people are, and identity and stuff like that. And it refuses to give any easy answers on it. And to its credit, I would add, because there's a couple of moments where you could see the easier route would be to do X, and it kind of doesn't. And it's a debut film from, I think it's Christina Cho, I think, and she's does terrific work here, extremely restrained, and I really, really want to see what she does next. It's very, very good, and all the more impressive for being how low key it is, and probably didn't help it in terms of maybe doing business or kind of getting that well known, but absolutely terrific. Really well worth watching. I'll mention one more, and then I have a hat trick of stuff that I'm going to bring up because I know Darren has seen them, so we can get into that. But one more I'll mention, which I saw in a movie as well, and I think I showed it during the week, which is a documentary called The Island of the Hungry Ghosts, which is a documentary about an island just off Australia called Christmas Island, and it's known for two things. One, there's this kind of crab migration that happens in it, in the island, and also there's a detention centre there. So migration being the kind of key connective kind of tissue
thread
here.
between the two.
This is really interesting as a documentary. I was fascinated by it. It's beautifully shot. Like, has these kind of really slow kind of pans in the jungle, and the jungles are kind of, voluminous, and he just moves across it really slowly, and then all of a sudden you see someone moving in the kind of corner. So it's kind of almost like a horror film, also kind of meditative weirdness to the shooting of it. Then it adds real kind of texture to the film. Like, it adds a real kind of sense of place, a sense of why people are there, what and how this was once there was no people there. There was, the animal world kept going, and there's a sense that all this will be ruined once again. At some point, in that way. It just connected kind of restriction of movement. It has these things where these kind of rangers kind of put up these little kind of wooden pieces on the side of the road between the road and the kind of mud bank, so crabs can literally cross over, so they can cross over the road. And then you have things like where you'd have to scoot them off the road to let cars go through, because they literally migrate across the middle of the road. So that's this kind of thing about it gets to this kind of thing about freedom of movement and migration. And then you see it talks to people in the migration centres there's this woman that she's basically a kind of counsellor, for want of a better word, people go to discuss about it, and it's where they discuss the kind of with the people that were in the documentary, because some of it falls down, it gets a little clunkier and a little more obvious in what it's getting at, where it doesn't really need to be. It's kind of, it detracts away. It's well-meaning and whatever, but it's just fairly heavy-handed. But it does detract from it a little bit, but it's still one of those films that I think it's worth watching. There's worth to it. It's really well shot, which I like in a documentary. Like, really, a lot of talk into what you're seeing in terms of footage and kind of what they shoot. Really, really interesting. And it is a movie, Ronan.
I'm in.
I think it's on the UK one. And it's about 90 minutes, which doesn't hurt.
I shall travel to Belfast.
Indeed.
While the border's still open.
Indeed. Yeah, also indeed. Right, so we'll kick off then. I watched Cloud Atlas yesterday.
Yay! The greatest film of 2013.
As Darren would tell you.
I'm waiting for the vindication to come for that, like it came for the Hateful Eight. I'm waiting.
Stop it, Darren. It's a remarkable film in so many ways. I'm a Wachowski's fan. I do like their films. Only Speed Racer is the only one I haven't seen. We can
Speed Racer is something.
I will see it because I'm a completist of nothing else. I'm like less said about the Matrix sequels, the better. But aside from those, I've had fun and various degrees of love for their films over the years. Like,
they're wonderfully kinetic visual films.
This is like Cloud Atlas is an extraordinarily ambitious take on. And it's Tom Tykwer as well, is co-directed as well.
He did Run Another Run, if I remember
yes,
correctly.
he did, yeah. So there's three directing it. It's kind of brilliant. It's maddening. It's weird. It's stupid. It's emotional. It's
how could you not
it's
love
clunky.
this?
It's obvious. It's daring. It's
It's
source.
lyrical.
It
It's
is.
poetic.
It's too much of everything. Like it's like, do you know the way you like that thing? Here's 10 multiplied by 10. Here you go. It does all that.
It's a lot.
But the
a
Wachowski's
cartoon poured directly into your brain. Like, my abiding memory is seeing it at the film festival 10 days in, exhausted, on the verge of collapse, and having this stuff just ladled into my frontal cortex, and it being just astounding.
I can see why that would work better in that regard. I'd say. I like the Wachowski's kind of focus on the storytelling, which I know I've read the novel a long time ago, and I imagine it comes across to some degree. But they're very aware of, I think Broadbent's character at one point is like, I hate those things about flashing forwards and flashing backwards in stories and things like that. There's a lot of that kind of going on. Kind of very smart about we know the story is wacky and it goes from whatever time to whatever time, but stick with us. We know what we're doing here,
And I actually like the process of adaptation where instead of the way the novel's structured, it's a series of it's half and half and half and half and half and folds over symmetrically in the middle. The thing that I like about the film is the film understands you can't necessarily do that.
That's what adaptation is.
It's changing and understanding it, and so it becomes this sort of almost like thematic sort of. It reminds me a lot of Game of Thrones and the way that Game of Thrones moves between scenes based on theme.
Yeah,
and it can cross.
I can see that,
distances.
and I can see them getting from this. Yeah, very much so. And the performances are remarkable because there's like 6 or 7 actors doing about 40 something roles in total, and your mileage will vary in which you can take to some degree. Some are better than others.
You get a tremendous range even in those 6 or 7.
You really do. Tom Hanks' roles are...
Tom Hanks is
a Dublin gangster.
Yes. Declan.
I should say I've seen about half an hour of this and I had to turn it off.
I don't think you've met Declan yet. Declan's amazing.
You'll remember him if you did.
Was he the one doing a book thing?
Yes, and he throws a critic off the roof.
Yeah, that didn't work.
That's
the bit I saw. I will rewatch.
No, that is literally all the bit. There's one scene of it, but you remember more of them, because you see the rest of the movie is just it's relatively conventional Tom Hanks stuff, lovable Tom Hanks. Here it's just swing for the fences. It's go with your instinct.
It's like he had an actor lined up and he's like shit. He didn't turn up. It's like Hanks will do it.
Yeah, it's just sort of slotted
he's a real champ. Like
Tom's in his trailer.
There's lots of Grant. There's lots of Broadbent. Wishaw is fabulous.
Wishaw's amazing.
He's missing in it. He's a beating heart of the film.
Always.
And without him, I'd probably like it quite a bit less because it needs an emotional weight to it.
Yeah.
Which that particular strand, I think, kind of ties it and adds it and kind of.
But it's the lowest key story. It's the
I agree, but it also
story,
I think it holds the whole thing together insofar as you can.
It's quite literally the theme. It's about the theme.
Yeah, no, it is. No, it
it's quite literally about the theme.
I really like that. It's long. It's just shade under 3 hours. My God.
I wouldn't change a
second. I don't think I would either. That's the weird thing. It's like there's nothing. It's not brilliant, and it's occasionally exhausting. But
I agree with half of what you said.
There's so much of it, and it's really interesting, and it's never boring in any way, shape, or form. Which for a 3-hour film, that's a good praise. Like I enjoyed it.
I come back to it once every couple of years. I think I've seen it 4 times.
My God, I've attempted to watch it 4 times. I think this might.
And you finally got over that hurdle.
I realised maybe not at 10 o'clock at night is probably the way to go.
Join us in 2021 when Jay will give us his opinion on Speed Racer.
I'll watch that soon. I don't think this is long, so I'll probably end.
And it's a lot candier-ish, and I kind of like I'm not as big a fan of Speed Racer as some of the boosters online are, but it's visually sumptuous.
So I heard, and I will watch it because I do want to complete the lots of it.
It's like 5 hours worth of images crammed into 2 hours.
I've seen Jupiter Ascending, for God's sake, and that is fun.
And Eddie Redmayne won an Oscar that year
for the wrong film. Redmayne's wrong. That is it's for the ages in many ways. It's remarkably bad.
Like there was extremely worried about that coming out as he was on the campaign trail.
No, like that's it. They're worried they're going to orbit
that
him.
Than he was in the other film.
Yes, I would argue that. Again, that's your Tom Hanks swing for the fences thing. Except I would argue Hanks works a lot better.
I would agree with that. But no, Jupiter Ascending's fun. It's not good, but it's certainly not bad. And I know, I was never bored for a second. And there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah.
Whatever about the Wachowskis, they'll throw something in that's always interesting, visually or otherwise. Yeah. And there's some fascinating stuff going on, always. And their TV show as well, the same on Netflix.
Sense8.
Yeah, they did the exact same thing. maddening, but my God, when it does something amazing,
But even when it doesn't do something amazing, there's a moment of, wait, did I hear, process, see that properly?
Exactly.
Which is an amazing thing when you're watching film, because we see a lot of films, and it's very much beat.
But this is exactly
the Wachowskis genuinely surprise me when they're like, okay, it's going to be a guy meets girl story. He's a sexy alien. Also, he's a dog. And you're like, oh, okay.
But that's the thing, and it's like, I've always bemoaned the fact that Tony Scott's not here anymore to do blockbusters. I want the Wachowskis to do blockbusters because they're the only.
Can you imagine the internet's reaction?
They should do all the blockbusters. Give them a Star Wars. Give them a Marvel film.
I would be all over that, but I can imagine the internet's reaction.
I can only imagine. But they're as daring visualists as you'll get in the Hollywood machine.
I don't think they'd be remotely interested in taking on the franchise.
Well, the creative control, I can't see them ceding creative control, and that's entirely fair. Because
God, I look forward to seeing.
Can you imagine the studio meeting over like Jupiter Ascending, where they're like, so yeah.
How much?
Eddie Redmayne, are you sure that's the choice you want to make in that scene?
His agent frantically calling them. Get the fuck out of here.
Do we have another take on this one?
It's but it's fascinating. It's absolutely, they're fascinating, and this is fascinating and very good in so many ways.
No, I've been very pleased to see the rehabilitation of the Hateful Eight over the past year or so. I'm sitting here, I'm waiting for the world to come to me on Cloud Atlas.
Well, I've come to you. I probably won't get there with the Hateful Eight, though. I will say that, but
never.
And anyway, 1 out of 2 ain't bad.
Yeah. So right. Ronan, when are you watching Cloud Atlas?
I have no problem with watching it. I have it on DVD actually.
We'd expect your report next week.
Well, that's my Christmas present for you, Ash, this year.
I haven't got a DVD player. I will watch at some point. I'm very open to watching it. I like their work very much.
Excellent. Okay, finally. There's a double bill for the ages.
Oi.
Right.
And we did invite Ronan to participate in this because we are...
And Grace, who's probably faked her own death not to have to get involved in it as well here. Yes, right. So, initially, I was going to watch Gotti because Gotti is appalling by all accounts. And I did watch Gotti, but I also watched United Passions, which Darren has been on me to watch for quite some time. And since Diana, when we watched that thing...
Yeah, that was a beautiful moment. That was the moment myself and Jay looked into each other's souls.
Yeah. So this is another go around. So this is
I think the outcome of this one's kind of interesting. But
I think it is. I watched Gotti first, which is possibly the worst directed film I've seen in about 15 years, if not longer, if not ever.
Yeah. It's amazing. Like, imagine it
directed... You can't even do cover shots. You can't even do pickup shots. Like, nothing works, at all.
Imagine a universe where the character that Kevin Connolly plays in Entourage were tasked with directing a movie. This would be the movie in the movie, in the TV show.
Yes, except
ironically.
Yeah. It's appalling.
There's a moment where there's a funeral in Brooklyn that's overlaid with the House of the Rising Sun, which opens with "There is a house in New Orleans."
Also, there's a scene of John Travolta getting into a car with a suitcase that lasts about 2 seconds and it has 4 cuts in it for no reason whatsoever. It's like coming down the steps, turn to the side, into the car. It's like,
because there was no 2-second shot of him not fucking it up.
That's exactly the problem. There's a scene when he goes into a building to meet one of the guys, near the start. That's about 10 minutes in, I think, and you can't see the guy standing at the car, which is his minder. Yeah. He's cut out of shot. His head's cut out of shot. But there's no coverage, obviously, to go back to it. So they have to cut the Travolta going upstairs to cut back to your man, and his head's still gone. And it's like, you just can't even get proper shots of the thing. And it's out of whack. It's clearly out of whack,
Did you not check this until you got back to the editing booth? And you were like, fuck it, we don't have the budget anymore because we blew it all on the cover of House of the Rising Sun.
Poor Stacey Keach, right? Stacey Keach plays the kind of older mentor thing to Travolta's character, right?
Never has a character death made me so happy because it meant that he's no longer in the film.
I would happily see Stacey Keach die so he doesn't have to appear in this. Yeah. That's how much I felt for him. The look in his face of like, I hope my grandkids appreciate my sacrifice for starting in this absolute trash.
Well, I mean, to be fair, this is like the first proper scene we get of Stacey Keach and Travolta set in a bar in 1977, but set to a Pitbull soundtrack. Yeah. And by the way, let's be clear on this. This is the best Pitbull soundtrack of 2018. Take that, Aquaman, which is not saying much.
No, it's not. Travolta, the film starts with him standing there looking at, is it Brooklyn Bridge, is it?
Yeah.
Or one of the bridges, and he turns to the camera and starts talking to the camera. And you're this kind of sinking feeling. I was like, Oh yeah,
This is
happening. I'm in here. He's like, and it's like within 4 minutes, every kind of gangster cliche is exhausted. He's made his bones. He's done everything. This is my city.
Yeah.
All the things, like everything is being done.
You've had a
already.
montage set to like a funky guitar which screams, "We couldn't afford the Rolling Stones."
Yeah. This is like Yellow Pack Scorsese, but it's not. That's Yellow Pack David O. Russell. Not even Yellow Pack Scorsese.
It's like Things to Do in Denver when you're dead was what this aspires to.
And it's a knockoff, a third-rate knockoff of that.
And like the weird thing is, like Travolta watching it, you can see Travolta's like, "This is my Godfather moment. This is my Brando moment."
He's the only one taking it seriously, as far as I can see. Everybody else is having a giggle. The script seems like a piss take. I don't know if it's real or not. I don't know if the script is meant to be bad, or whether it's actually just bad.
Here's an actual line. Here's an actual line. So Gotti's son, spoiler, who was 12 years old, gets hit by a car and dies. Gotti is dealing with the emotional fallout of this for the bones of like 30 seconds. One of his made men, I presume, says to him, "We don't know why, but there has to be a reason." And there's a really odd dramatic pause, like the actor forgot his line and we didn't have a better take. Why, God, let this happen. And to this, Gotti responds with, "He was 12 years old. He hadn't a hair on his prick." And you're like, well, somebody understands tone here.
Also,
also the bit where he crawls into bed with his wife afterwards and says, "I love you, honey, but we got 4 other kids."
You're kidding.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
I have a notebook filled with phrases from it which I've forgotten, and it's really, really annoying the hell out of me because some of this stuff is remarkable.
There's a moment where like they're talking about like the maid who works in the boss Paulie's house, and Gotti says, "I wouldn't fuck her with your dick," right? Which is a standard mob cliche. But then the exposition scene continues. But somehow at the end we spend 30 seconds on the driver giggling to himself, which Stacy Keach, who is in the back seat of the car while this is happening, says, "What's so funny?" And Travolta turns around and explains to Keach and to the audience, because of how the camera's positioned, he's laughing because I wouldn't fuck her with his dick.
Yeah, he explains the joke.
He explains the joke, which was not funny to begin with. It's really, really terrible. Oh, there's a moment where they cut to like a boss of bosses meeting after Gotti's ascendant, right? And it cuts in. Now, to be clear, this is 1985. There is no reason for this to be happening, but Gotti is describing the plot of Goldfinger.
What?
1985, people. It's staggering. But there's this weird thing that runs through it where it's based on the biography of Gotti written by his son.
Yeah.
And towards the climax, it becomes abundantly clear what, like, the sort of, journalistic perspective of this film happens to be, which is the story of John A. Gotti, who gets sort of indoctrinated into the mob. And he has a meeting. And at the meeting where he swears fidelity to the family, they make sure that you hear the lines, "You don't endanger civilians. You never sell drugs. They're prohibited. You don't fuck around with bombs." And like over the course of the final half hour, it becomes clear the real story of Gotti is not Gotti himself, but how John A. Gotti, his son, got fucked over by the government because he was just working in the neighborhood.
This is the moral, right?
Wow.
This is the moral at the end of it, and it comes up, the FBI turned all these guys onto the street. That basically gave evidence against them.
Against John A. Gotti. And persecuted.
So the problem was the FBI basically are the bad guys because they released all these criminals.
But they kept Gotti in prison.
But they kept Gotti, the one true hero of the world. It's like, oh my fucking God. That's the moral you're going. That's where you're saying, that's where you have a pitch in the end of this.
And it's great because like that little title card at the end, the biography title card, stops and interrupts so that Travolta can turn around and address the camera. It's staggeringly terrible. And that's even like leaving aside lines like, "If you ever do that again, I will park a bus up your ass fucking sideways."
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not sure why the sideways is necessary, but yeah.
Gotti knows.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's one of the worst films that's ever been made, but I can absolutely see myself watching it again. I'm trying to get my wife to watch it. She's not biting.
Firmly in your way.
I gotta get drunk one night and watch it because it looks like it's gonna be the ultimate drunk film.
There's a moment where Gotti is narrating to the audience, and Travolta has clearly recorded this in a sound booth so they can do a clean take. Hell, they could edit the take that they have, but he says, "As a boss, Paulie was a fish in the desert." Dramatic pause. A fish out of water. And you're like, you could just cut the bit where he fubbed the line. Like, to be fair, there's a whole host of that repetitive dialogue, which is that great bad movie stuff where it's like, "Let him leave the light on. Kids are scared of the dark." And his wife asks, "Just till John gets back." And he replies, just till John gets back. There's Pruitt Taylor Vince, who is one of those great creepy actors in the 90s. And he's playing like his best friend. He's Antonio.
It's uncle, isn't it?
His uncle,
brother,
Antonio, who's like from the neighborhood and part of this like Italian American family where all the other actors are doing these heavy Italian American accents. Pruitt Taylor Vince seemed to have just shown up and was like, "Fuck it, I'm from Louisiana. I'm just gonna speak how I normally speak." And nobody seems to find that odd. It's staggering.
It's appalling. But it's remarkable. I'm going to bring my notebook next week to remember the other lines. I'm really annoyed with myself that I bring it. So I literally paused to write them down.
Now, a dramatic reading from the script of Gotti.
Also the bit where Gotti is decrying the mob boss that they have at the moment, and he's like, all Paul is about is money. He's not about what organized crime should be about, which is helping the community, people.
This has got to be a piss take.
It's amazing.
That's what I'm thinking, right? I'm thinking the script is written for giggles. But I don't know. I actually don't know. Because he could be playing it. I think halfway through this trial, he's going to get the Oscar.
Yeah. No, he shaves his head, goes full Brando. He's dying of cancer, which he tells you 7 times. Yeah. Everybody's like,
I would give up this cancer. Do you not think I'd give up this cancer to get you out of jail?
Yeah.
Oh my God, stop.
I'd rather get this cancer than you get a cold. It's staggering. And fucking cancer is a line that's repeated no fewer than 3 times over the course of the film.
It's good. It's really good. It's down the levels of good or bad, depending on how you like it.
Now, this is where we disagree, I think.
Okay. United Passions.
United Passions.
Yeah, I don't think I like this. I think this was bad as opposed to good bad.
I think this was better bad than Gotti was.
No.
Okay. Well, give us your take on United Passions.
Right, United Passions, which Darren did say to me quite a while back that I should watch because I'd like, for various reasons. And Darren knows me that I'm a sucker for these kind of things, so I will. And so I did. There's a great Twitter thread on it, which has really reminded me of it from the other day, whose name I can't remember.
Shame as it ever was.
Yeah, he's a great Twitter thread, which has actually reminded me of the film. So
and we don't have show notes for this, but if we did, we would include the is it the Revolver podcast? Did an episode on it, and they also did an interview with the Irish actor who played the mean journalist who's going to crack open this FIFA investigation.
2 or 3 Irish actors seem to turn up in the second half of the film, which is really weird.
But there's a journalist who's going to crack this case open, and the movie's like, why are you giving these guys such a hard time about a little corruption? It's great. It's the most evil journalist I've ever seen in a film. He's like scuzzy. He looks like he's from the cast of Love, Hate.
Right, okay, right. FIFA basically commissioned this film and paid for this film, which cost about 30 million to make. Basically to say how great they are, right? It stars Sam Neill, Jared Depardieu, and Tim Roth.
And Fisher Stevens.
Yeah.
Oh, Sam Neill's amazing.
Sam Neill is beamed in from a different planet. Like
he's playing a Brazilian, but he's doing an accent, but it's not his accent, and it's not a Brazilian accent.
I don't know what
either.
It is, but it's pitched at a level that I can't even hear.
And it's great because he's so obviously evil. There's like a sequence in which he looms over a model of a football pitch and sprinkles his gold over it like money.
No, it's those things that it's the silver kind of things that they're going to. It was the Argentinian World Cup where all the crowd threw them in. It's like tinsel-y kind of things.
Yeah, and it is a scene from a Bond movie because he's leering and the camera's sort of like, this is really creepy. And Sam Neill's the actor who really understands what he's doing.
Yeah, he does. He's playing it from the different film, as he should be. Poor Tim Roth, who initially, and you can see he's trying to take it seriously, admirably so, starts losing the will to live in his eyes. The light goes out in his eyes at some point, and it's a sad, sad thing to see. It's really... But okay, we start off right. The FIFA organisation to start
the first half.
This
which
European
is not great.
Dalmio ad of guys with moustaches
ethnic
in Europe,
stereotypes.
Right? No, to me, right? They're in Europe,
and the stuffy British are trying to squeeze them out of football.
Well, the stuffy British reinvented the game, etc. Black people can't play football, all that kind of stuff, right?
Women, I tell you.
They do kick the shit out of Brits, which is fun. There is a bit of crack with that. What's the Europeans kind of laughing at them, right? So you can enjoy that in this day and age. But then it cuts to the kind of Depardieu.
We don't want to be in your European Union of Soccer.
This is a European press conference, and Depardieu is in the audience,
this
in
is
the crowd,
amazing.
and he starts shouting questions, and they all try to stop him, right? But they don't really. They only stop him in the way a script tells you to stop. They're like, "Oh, me, no, you finish," and he interrupts him again. But they're delivering the lines like
Yeah,
they
like
know they're going to be
expecting
interrupted, like
Yeah.
as opposed to the conversation. It's amazing
because
it's
he
so terrible.
literally takes control of the
And
conference.
goes up and stands up and is like, "No, I'm going to
and
speak
starts
now."
fielding questions and stops the people who he's interrupted from interrupting him back. It's amazing.
So Depardieu takes over. He's I can't remember the guy's name.
Remy? No.
Oh, she was Remy. Yeah.
Yeah.
He designed the World Cup trophy and stuff back in the day, and then he
And
passed
also
on to-
believes that if FIFA had been around, World War II wouldn't have happened. There's a moment where where they play like this horrible massacre, which didn't actually happen, to be absolutely clear. It's ahistorical, but this horrible massacre of like football players, and I think it's the Ukraine.
Yeah, playing
They're
basically
massacred by-
Escape to Victory,
Yeah.
but with a machine guns.
with a much darker ending. But there's a
Totally
moment.
untrue.
But it is apparently.
But it's
totally
apocryphal,
untrue.
you know, it's a World War football
It's a story
or
that
whatever
they tell.
story.
But that scene, which is one of two scenes of people playing football in the film, to be clear, is shot in this sort of like Schindler's List, slow motion, black and white, faded over boardroom scenes. By the way, this movie loves boardroom scenes.
Oh, yeah. It's administrative. The whole thing is administrative.
But it ends with like the camera panning to Gerard Depardieu's face as he shakes his head solemnly and says, "We weren't there."
And then he looks at
We
me and
weren't
says
there.
again, "Yeah,
As if to say, if
If
FIFA
we
had
had
been
been
there
there,
administrating
war
that
would
match,
not have happened. If we could have taken control of governments, the war would not have happened."
and certainly nobody would have been massacred in a game that we were officiating,
Yeah.
and presumably taking all the money from the ticket sales. There's a great moment where they're organising the World Cup, and Remy is basically like, "Do you have it within you to give us all the ticket sales? Yes. Do you have it within you to build the stadiums that we will need to host this tournament? Yes. Do you have it within you to pay for all of our expenses, including ludicrously corrupt ones? Yes." It's like, then I think we might be able to do business. It's amazing.
And this thing is how that it kind of passes the baton on from Remy to Havilanche, which is Sam Neill, and then on to Sepp Blatter, which is Tim Roth. So you have this. It thinks it's doing a kind of an epic because the only thing an epic needs 100 years, right?
Who's Depardieu playing?
Jules Remy.
He's the guy who created the trophy.
Yeah. And then he kind of passed on to Havilanche, who was the kind of the FIFA president when it becomes the proper FIFA organisation.
Who the movie sort of heavily implies, but never outright states, is massively corrupt because he's the guy who happened to be gone by the time they were making the movie.
Yeah, but also then the lay it all in Sepp Blatter, who
Yes.
comes in almost like he's going to root out the problem.
It's amazing.
And not bury his face in the trough, which is essentially what he did.
But this is
And
the
then
thing.
the pitch of the film is like, they will never let you do what you need to do.
Yeah.
You know, like he's the victim.
He's the
here.
White Knight.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
That, to be fair, it's very heavily implied. Like the movie seems to heavily lean on this idea that even though like Blatter's read the script and signed off on it, the director and cast are like, well, because there's
we
the
can
moment
infer.
his only friend in the world is the head of Adidas, the title sponsor of the World Cup. No, I mean seriously. Like they
That shows him the original Adidas stuff in the
they-
back of a car.
Yeah, they meet in a car park in the border of Switzerland where they can't be recorded and take a look at the merchandise.
Look at it. We got jerseys. We got footballs.
It gets even better. When there's corruption at FIFA, Sepp Blatter takes his only friend in the world out to lunch where they talk about the corruption. And it's a great scene because there's so much like subtext there because it's basically like somebody's been stealing money from the accounts and the head of Adidas says, do you have any idea who it might be? And Sepp pauses and says, oh, I have some idea. And then there's just silence for a couple of minutes. And then Sepp Blatter says, it's really uncomfortable. I had to write a check from my own personal account to cover administrative
And there's
costs.
a solemn look then. It's like, oh.
But it's like, how did you have the exact amount of money that went missing in your personal account, Sepp? But there's also a moment in what can only be described as a triumphant corruption montage where they travel the world and go to various
that's
exotic
amazing.
boardrooms where the head of Adidas dies, but apparently holds his funeral in a boardroom and Sepp Blatter's the only person who attends. It's amazing.
And then there's this thing like where Blatter might not get re-elected. So there's this thing whereby, you will not get the votes. And then he talks to Sam Neill. Sam Neill basically is like your
Sam Neill's on
consigliere
a boat.
Yeah.
They're on a boat in the middle of the water, so they can't be listened to. It's like something from, have you seen Insomnia? The Christopher, so it's that sort of like where creepy villain and hero are meeting. It's like, so you come to me to help you in this moment of need.
You have to find what they
value.
And you have to
squeeze.
Then all of a sudden he gets the most of these back then. It's like, hey. And
But it's staggering because and then despite all this seemingly solemn tone, the movie ends with Sepp Blatter not only defeating corruption in like a Blofeld boardroom. It's amazing. It's like the head of Smirch.
Yeah, it's amazing. It is,
But it does this while he completes his goals of A, bringing women's soccer into the mainstream. Keep in mind that this real-life Sepp Blatter said the thing he loves most about women's football is the short shorts. B, bringing football to South Africa, and thus finally completing South Africa's journey that began with the ending of apartheid. And C, set to the tune of Pata Pata, which is this wonderfully joyful song, which effectively catches up on where the various characters are, including Sam Neill, who is fishing with his family on the back of a boat, like wrestling with the fishing rod in that sort of kooky uncle way, despite the fact the last scene was basically, you find something important to them and you squeeze. It's staggering.
It is staggering. I have to say I much preferred Gotti because only because Travolta's taken it so seriously. It's that push and pull between that kind of Travolta's kind of honestly earnest Oscar-winning ideas and everybody else's absolute complete incompetence. And whereas this has, they're all just slightly too good and too bad in United Passions. Plus it's propaganda, complete and utter propaganda, which puts me off it. Even though I did enjoy it for the most part, but it's awful. It's like they're both awful films. Like
they are awful films,
but my
great
God,
fun.
I'm glad I watched them.
Yeah.
I'm really glad I watched them.
I mean, Ronan, come on, have we sold you?
Not really, no.
Okay, fine.
Don't ever watch United Passions, but I would absolutely.
No.
I'm very glad you watched these, so I didn't have to, and I got to enjoy all those awful bits nonetheless.
Fine. And by the way, do watch United Passions. United Passions is amazing. Anyway, so what did I watch this week? I watched Dodgeball, a true underdog story, a rewatch.
I like Dodgeball.
Which has aged remarkably well. Which
Is
I
it
quite
now
like.
15 years old?
It is now 15 years old, yes. It was airing on Film 4. If
Nobody
you
makes me bleed
my own blood.
Nobody.
It's full of all these quotable lines, because everybody thinks the quotable...
He's literally taking a bull by the horns.
Yeah. While pointing to a picture of him taking the bull by the horn.
Yeah,
or fucking Chuck Norris. Or even like, if you dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball.
Yeah.
It's full of all these wonderful quotables.
Cliches everywhere, but it's great.
Everybody thinks of Anchorman as like the quotable 2000 comedy, and it probably is.
Talladega
but
Nights.
I know, okay. Shake and bake, baby, shake and bake.
Shake and bake.
But it's... You must say that I like crepes.
It's like a pancake. That's a good deal. That's a good compromise, no?
Yeah. But
I love Talladega Nights so much. Sorry.
Dodgeball, what elevates Dodgeball, or what doesn't elevate Dodgeball, but what makes it so great, is the fact that it's basically a comedy built around watching people get hit in the private parts by balls that are thrown incredibly hard. That's the entire premise of the movie.
Also, remarkably low stakes.
Yes.
In relative terms, like nothing's really like there's there's something on stake, but it's not really,
It's quite literally just watch people get hit with objects and fall down.
But it's aged really badly as Lance Armstrong.
The Lance Armstrong
cameo was a lot weirder now.
And some of its sexual politics as well, as you might expect of a comedy of the time. Yeah, the Lance Armstrong cameo is
an interesting one.
Yeah, it's almost become a joke of itself to a certain extent. I rewatched First Man, which has an astounding opening scene and an astounding rest of the film, but we'll agree on the opening scene. And I also rewatched V for Vendetta, which was an interesting watch, another film that is approaching the 15-year mark.
I would imagine that hasn't aged well. I wasn't a massive fan of it back in the day.
Interestingly is probably the best way to describe it. It's one of those interesting films where it's like Fight Club to that extent, where there's a question of where exactly it falls on the culture wars that are being waged. Because at the time it was very much a polemic against the Bush administration. In that, like, it was quite obviously about the religious right, for example. It was very firmly about terrorism, and it has this strain of trutherism that runs through it, which is added to Moore's work. This idea of, what if it was an inside job sort of thing. Yeah. Now, you've got a cast that's doing a wonderful job selling it. Portman is great, as she generally tends to be. Stephen Rea is fantastic in sort of like this gumshoe cop role. And Hugo Weaving is fantastic in a role where he basically stands there for about half the time, the other half being his stunt double, who is David Leitch, the director of John Wick, and basically acts behind a mask, which is... But it has this sort of push and pull between it where... And again, this is sort of the fracture of the early 2000s you see shining through, where the reaction against the Bush era is, on the one hand, this idea of maybe liberalism and tolerance and sort of, that sort of idealism. And in fact, to be fair, I suspect in large part due to Wachowski's involvement, this is very explicitly sort of sexually tolerant. It refocuses a lot of the Moore's attention from in the book, in the comic, which was more interested in white supremacy. And that's still there, but refocuses a lot of that in sexual terms, in terms of like your sexual identity, stuff like that. But then there's the uncomfortable aspect of, part of the reaction to the Bush era being what happened on the right, where you have this sort of weird, like almost Julian Assange style, kind of crazy rambling about how absolute we can't trust anybody in power, and how nuts this is, and how the only sane thing to do is to pick up a weapon and throw it really cool in slow motion. And it's a very mixed film. It's an interesting artifact of its time, but it also aged in a way that is interesting in that a lot of its commentaries about the excesses and dangers of the Bush era almost seem naive now. It seemed cartoonish perhaps at the time, but now you're living in an era where, it's completely, make Britain great again. I think is a line that is actually uttered in the course of the film.
Yikes.
Anyway, so let's move on to talk about the week in film news. Very, very quickly, because the real story doesn't happen until next week, but the Oscar nominees are out next week. So do we have any final predictions,
when
any observations? I believe they're out on Tuesday morning.
Okay. A Little Stranger, 10 nominations, I think.
Sweep the board.
I predict that I will be very annoyed. Loads of terrible things going on.
Bo Rap getting about 10, I'd say,
Yeah.
nominations. Is it?
Well, I mean,
coasts to more victories.
Well, Vulture described Green Book and Bohemian Rhapsody as the twin villains of this Oscar season, which is interesting. Because again,
haven't seen Green Book, can't comment. Bohemian Rhapsody is the devil itself in bad clothes.
Well, I mean, you may also want to watch Green Book. I'm not saying it'll be worse, but it'll be in that sort of ballpark.
Is it going to set me off?
It might set you off.
But
I may have an opportunity for you to talk about it soon if you're interested.
Okay.
All right, then. In terms of other news, Screen Ireland announced its 2019 slate of productions today. Niall was actually tweeting from the event.
Yes, he was at it.
With speakers including like Nissa Hartman and Hardiman and Shanika as well. So in terms of just high-level sort of key statistics, all these compiled by Niall, to be clear. Don't let anybody think that we've actually done any work here.
Okay.
So according to, 12,000 people are now employed in film, television, and animation production, which is double what it was in 2008. The overall production activity in Ireland has increased on 2017 figures of 286 million, and the 2018 figures will be released shortly. In 2018, Screen Ireland invested 13.7 million across 50 projects, and generated approximately 40 million euro in return to the Irish Exchequer, which is quite a good sort of...
Which puts to bed this stupid notion that, it's a waste of money putting anything into the arts.
Yeah.
Like these, especially the Irish film industry lately, is generating enormous amounts of revenue for us. And the knock-on effects, look at Star Wars Island, all this kind of thing.
Yeah, and I mean, Star Wars Island in terms of economy, the favourite in terms of prestige. I mean, the favourite is going to do very, very well next week. And I mean, in terms of culturally as well, 2018 was a breakthrough year for Irish female filmmakers as well.
Yeah.
In terms of Nora Twomey was the first Irish woman director to have a debut feature nominated for an Academy Award, and the first ever female solo director to win the Best Independent Animated Feature at the Annie Awards. Emer Reynolds became the first Irish woman documentary director to win an Emmy. And Carmel Waters was the first Irish woman to take home the prestigious Fibresky Prize for the Discovery Programme at TIFF, which is great. And I mean, apparently that trend is going to continue going forward. And it's like they're already seeing dividends in terms of like these programs and this sort of like encouraging women to participate in the process. Production funding decisions with female directors increased from 20% in 2017 to 36% in 2018. Production funding with female writers increased from 20% to 45%. And more interestingly, and perhaps the best kind of watermark or sort of like indication of how well this project is going, is that the number of female directors between 2017 and 2018 has increased from 15% to 31%. So this is pretty impressive.
It's really good to see, and I think we are aiming for parity come 2020, which is extremely soon, and bring it on.
Yeah, which is just really, really great. So we're really sort of looking forward to that. In terms of other news, it should be announced that Extraordinary will be premiering at South by Southwest.
It's a sci-fi comedy, I think, isn't it? It
is indeed. It's Maeve Higgins and Will Forte, I believe, as well, and a host of Irish sort of supporting actors as well.
That's good. South by Southwest is pretty prestigious, so that's good going. Also, new Chris Morris film being premiered there as well, just to say.
Oh, do we know what it is, actually?
Excellent.
We do. I can't think of the name of it offhand, but it's Anna Kendrick in it.
Oh, okay.
You just know it's going to be wonderful because everything he's ever done
is
from
wonderful.
Four Lions back to Brass Eye.
Yeah, I'm all over it. But the South by Southwest is a pretty decent one to get into.
All right. In terms of other news, and we should probably cover this, unfortunately, Jason Reitman has announced that he will be directing a sequel to Ghostbusters because the culture war is still raging, people. It's... you would think that like Sony looked at the success of like Into the Spider-Verse, which is going to be a cornerstone for them going forward managed to be the movie that secured the idea that they can build a shared universe around, there's the one superhero franchise that they have, I would have taken from that maybe these things can grow in that direction. Or, to pick an example, like the top 3 films in 2017 being all female led, and looking at that and saying there's actually a direction that we can go here that reflects the tastes of the general public. But no, we are doing a sequel to Ghostbusters 2 from the son of the director of Ghostbusters 2.
But in fairness to them, doing that, putting him in the director's seat is, absolutely not making any secret of exactly what they're doing, which is pandering to a very particular audience.
I mean, even the quotes, which is again the sort of the attitude of it, which is because you can do this in a way that doesn't feel like it's pandering to those sorts of people and those sort of voices and those reactionary attitudes. On the other hand, you can have Reitman come out and say this is not a reboot. This is a real sequel. This is an.
Did he say that?
Yep.
What a dick.
Yeah, and you're like, wow, it's like, you could be sort of gracious there. You could be like, well, we're expanding it. We're branching out. We're sort of, we're going to look at folding in, and we're going to take a look at what Paul did, and we're going to realize how we can make that work in terms of this. This is very much directly pandering, which is kind of, it is
It's
disheartening.
2019, though, isn't it? Or 2018, if you want to look at it. It's the way these things can go. Politically, it feels like a kind of,
Which is a shame, because it
bunkering
actually
down kind of thing.
it feels like there's been growth, and I guess this ties back into the whole Oscar thing, where it's like you're looking at movies like Black Panther being the first Marvel film probably to get a Best Picture nomination, but which would have been unthinkable several years ago.
Yeah.
And like the fact that it was a cultural phenomenon on the scale that it was, not despite its diversity, but because of its diversity. You look at things like Gillette doing that advertisement, which and again,
It's been a week.
It's highly cynical. It's incredibly cynical and targeted, and it's very brand managed. And in fact, it's a direct result of 61% of Americans saying that they want advertisers that reflect their values. So it's entirely calculated and all this sort of stuff. But at the same time, it does have some social utility in terms of spreading that idea and normalizing it, which is a good thing, surely. Yeah. But anyway, sorry, this is... it's a very depressing angle that we've sort of gone down here. Is worth noting that Maze is going to be distributed in the US, which was the Irish film from last year, starring Tom Vaughan Lawler.
I haven't seen that, actually. I know it's on Netflix. I should get
Yeah,
to
I
it.
haven't seen it either.
I would. It's good. I liked it a lot, but it's a very sort of very conventional sort of story. It's based on a true story, obviously. It's inspired by a true story and by real events. And it sort of doesn't really do anything sort of especially exotic with that, but it's anchored in 2 great performances and a nice central metaphor, the question of, like, in Northern Ireland, who really was captive to whom, which is a nice push and pull between the two. So if you do have Netflix, I would wholeheartedly recommend seeking it out. The Dublin International Film Festival. Again, a lot of our news this week seems to be covering things that will be happening next week. But the Dublin International Film Festival will be announcing its lineup next Wednesday. So they'll be covering that next Thursday. But they have preliminarily announced their Fantastic Flix season.
Yeah, there's a few on it that looks pretty good. Fergal
Well,
Rock
eighth grade
of this
is-
parish, who wrote Departures, I think it is premiering during that Fantastic Flix.
What's
Not
the name of it?
Departures, I think.
Ah, cool.
So I'm looking forward to that. And the chaplain thing with
With a live musical accompaniment, which is always
that. And 8th grade, which is the Bo Burnham
one, which he's coming over for as well, I believe. It's a fantastic lineup as well. There's also, and I quite admire the ambition of this, they're screening the Muppet movie simultaneously around Dublin on the Sunday as well. So no matter where you are in Dublin, there should be a cinema relatively accessible to you. The original Muppet movie from, no, not the Muppets, but the Muppet is getting, the Muppet movie is getting its 40th anniversary.
Okay.
And so they've arranged on the same day. In fact, if you are a mad Muppets fan, you could probably see it 4 times in 4 different cinemas. But they're screening...
You'd want to be insane, though, wouldn't you?
Well, I mean,
yeah.
in the middle of a film festival, you probably have better things to be doing. But like screening in Dundrum in the morning, for example, in Cineworld in the afternoon, in the Point Village a little bit later on, and then sort of coming back to Savoy in the evening. So it's got this sort of wide range
idea.
of
I
Ralph
know it's not
Fiennes as
popular,
well.
though, but anyway, there you go.
I think it's nice that it's making it accessible.
Sure.
Like one of the great things about the film festival has been taking the films on tour afterwards outside of the regular festival.
Yeah,
as well,
I'm not
making
going
them
out to Dundrum, though. It's too far away.
But okay.
We're city centre people there.
In this thing. And Joe Cornish's The Kid Who Will Be King is actually available. And I believe the tickets are free.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know if they're gone, but this morning they were free, which is good. All right then. So let's move on to talking about the top 10, everybody's favorite part of the podcast. I sense much enthusiasm radiating from this corner of the room.
Absolutely.
So last week at number 10, it was Holmes and Watson. That has dropped out, surprising absolutely
shocked.
nobody. And creeping back in is Creed 2.
That makes me happy. Much money?
It has so far at the Irish box office earned 1.1 million, which
Excellent.
is quite a nice. Sort of particularly as the budget was kept relatively under control.
Yeah.
This isn't like this isn't Aquaman, people. So it was kept under control, and it seems to have done very, very well for itself. It outperformed Creed, I believe, as well, didn't it?
Oh, really?
Oh, that's good.
See.
and
So
it
we're going to get a third then, I guess.
I suspect, which is pretty impressive. At number 9, it's Wreck-It Ralph 2, Ralph Breaks the Internet, which I still haven't seen.
I've seen it, weirdly.
Jay has seen more top 10 films than Darren at this point in the show.
This is shocking.
Yeah.
I had problems with it. I'd said before, once the whole Disney cake and eat it. It's still quite fun and enjoyable, and the kids probably won't be getting the corporate message as such, but it's waiting for them the next few years. Anyway,
Yeah,
don't
just let it
worry
simmer
about
in
that.
the subconscious.
Planting
Yeah.
that seed right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's no emoji movie.
Well, I wouldn't know because I haven't seen it, but I'll take your word
No,
for
the
it.
emoji movie is not a good bad movie. The
I
Emoji Movie's a
suspect
bad
it's
bad
not.
movie.
I'm not going to see it.
And number 8, it's Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which I saw again this weekend.
Good lord.
It is astounding.
I should see it. I'm hoping to see it before it leaves the cinema.
Oh, have you not seen it yet?
No,
I
I'm getting around to it one day.
It seems to be doing relatively well. In fact, as has been observed, it is the leggiest Spider-Man movie.
Hey.
But yeah, if you love it, go see it. It's fantastic. It's for kids of all ages.
But it has happened about 3 times in a row now that everybody has said, "No, this is a great superhero movie," and I've come out of it being like, "No, it isn't. Shut up."
Ronan, let me ask you a question. Do you hate Joy?
David O. Russell film.
No, just Joy.
I sometimes I do.
But then maybe it may not be for you. All right, at number 7, if you hate Joy, this is probably the film for you to see again, unfortunately. Bohemian Rhapsody. Bo-Rap, as the kids call it.
Of course, it'll still be
In
there.
total or this weekend?
Both.
Okay, this weekend, €88,000. In total, €3.5 million.
Jesus Christ.
I was speaking to somebody today who was talking about A Star Is Born and said, "Oh, it won Best Picture at the Golden Globes, didn't it?" And I said, "No, that was Bohemian Rhapsody." And this person then said, "Oh yeah, because I was going to go see it the other night and it's sold out." So it's getting a serious boost out of awards season.
And
which is,
people
it
like
is.
it. I mean, and we have our problems with it. Nobody on this podcast is especially fond of it.
Some
Even
of
the
us
one who
haven't
hasn't seen
seen
it. Yes.
Some of us thus doing the best work you can possibly do with this film. But no, the point has been well made here and otherwhere that it is by far the sort of LGBT-centric film that has been seen by most people probably ever at this point. Certainly in a cinema.
Yeah.
And that's really bad because it is not a good representation in any way at all. Boy, more on.
At number 6, it's Aquaman. The highest grossing movie in the DCEU. Yeah. A massive financial success for everybody involved. And, lest we forget, Jason Momoa and James Wan making the argument that it was truly an underdog success.
Yeah.
Why don't we say DCU?
It's the extended universe. I've got no idea why the E is necessary there. I mean, the thing is, it should be the DCCU, but that doesn't really work.
Oof.
Yeah, I know. I've got no idea why the E is in there. It's...
I'm not seeing this ever.
Yeah,
I'd say
no,
I'm pretty
I'm
sure I'm
good.
never going to.
Did you hear about speaking of, because Pitbull seems to be a recurring theme of this particular
Really?
podcast episode apparently.
Who'd have thunk it?
We're very Pitbullish here. But do you hear about the project, the installation in the middle of, I think it's the what's the desert in Africa that's not
Toto's Africa.
Yes.
Yeah, I did read this.
Namibian Desert, I believe it is.
Namibian Desert.
Namibian Desert. But it's basically they have installed an installation somewhere in the middle of the desert, solar powered, that will blare Toto's Africa
until the end of time.
Until the
or until somebody
end
smashes it with a hammer.
of time.
It's things like that make me think the end of time can't come soon enough.
It's brilliant. It's the perfect blend of pretentious and trashy. You were talking about how sometimes you don't get the balance right when trash wants to be pretentious. Sometimes, Ronan, sometimes it can be beautiful.
Yeah, I'm still waiting.
All right. Well, we'll take you to the Namibian Desert then. We'll see if we can get a Kickstarter going for that one.
Please.
It would take a lot to drag
I
us
need
away
a holiday.
from here. At number 5, it's Bumblebee.
Yeah, great reviews. I've never seen it.
Yeah, the best reviews in the Transformers franchise and the lowest box office grosses, which is kind of disappointing.
People like Michael Bay,
really?
smashy things.
Yeah.
That is a shame. they've done something that most people are like,
You
oh, this is
go
quite
back to the
good,
other
and
one.
it's
You go back to the
tanking.
other way,
Yeah.
lads. Let's just destroy buildings. That's all anybody
I mean,
wants.
you can-
Definitive proof that people love shite.
A recurring motif of our journey through the top 10 each and every week, it would seem. Bumblebee's charming. It's at its best in the middle section where it's a story of a girl in her car. And yeah, it's Haley Steinfeld is great as
I
she
like her.
usually is. She's
That's it.
really, really great. And I mean, it's you can't really describe her as somebody to watch when her sort of big debut was at the age of 13, getting a Best Supporting Actress.
She's doing good work
nomination.
though. I like Abe name and stuff. Like she's a fine actress.
Yeah.
When we say it's made the least money of them, has it still made a fortune?
Let me just double check on this.
It probably has.
Yeah, I would think it would.
I don't know what the buzz has been around this one, unfortunately.
Stop it there.
What? But yeah, this is one of those movies. It's like Aquaman. I suspect that it'll probably do quite well overseas.
Yeah, I would.
Because Aquaman's percentage take is something like 70% overseas.
Damn.
Yeah, I know. So domestic total is 110 million. Worldwide total is 266 million. So 70% of its take overseas.
It's a good chunk
Which
of
is
change.
quite impressive. Its budget was 135 million, which means allowing for double that in terms of marketing and promotion. It is probably in the green. Is it green enough is the question, or will it leave Paramount feeling a little yellow? Okay, at number 4, critics are having a hard time seeing the upside to this one. Bryan Cranston, Kevin Hart.
God.
Oh yeah.
This is a bad top 10. I have to say, I'm gonna be honest.
It's
I know
the
most bad
third week
10.
in
I
January,
don't care.
Jay.
This is really bad though. I don't know what I was expecting.
third
It's
week.
something. Anything.
This isn't great, really.
It's the third week. Have
There's
you
nothing that I'm out of here. I'm going to the cinema. No.
really? You mean my hardcore pitch of Bumblebee didn't work? No. But yeah. Well, I mean, Into the Spider-Verse has a good chance then.
Yes, I may well see it this weekend.
But yeah, the upside, which is, yes, if you have read, Vulture did an excellent feature on this during the week, I would wholeheartedly recommend, which basically consists of the horror story that everybody involved in the film endured from the moment that they wrapped filming. Now, admittedly, given some of the controversies around some of the people involved in the film, you can't feel too bad about it. But it does feel a little bit like the film was cursed from its very inception. I mean, the obvious solution would be not to make it and just watch Untouchables instead.
Yeah.
But
it's made
do
money
that
though.
either.
In the States, like, it's done alright.
Yeah, it's done all right, and it's done all right here as well.
Couldn't imagine it cost a lot.
No, and it's been sitting on the shelf since 2017 as well. So it's they wrapped filming, and then the Weinstein stuff came out was the issue. Weinstein was going to push this as like the big. This was going to be his big sort of Oscar movie, and then it just sort of
He
fell
probably
apart.
would have made it happen.
Absolutely.
Like this would be this year's Green Book. Like this would have been last year's Green Book if
Yeah.
the Weinstein thing hadn't happened.
Imagine a Kevin Hart Oscar nomination. My God, that's
Oh, yeah,
what
no.
world we would have been in.
Yeah, like that's it. You
There's
would
an
have
alternate universe you don't want to think of it.
Oscar host and Oscar nominee.
Stop, just stop.
All right, at number 3, and I'm going to field the floor to Ronan here. It's The Favourite.
Ah, yes.
Because you saw this week.
I did. I went to the favourite last
Could have
night.
forgot about that.
Belatedly catching up. I was totally in. Sorry, Jay.
Nah.
All in.
God damn
Really enjoyed it. I do think
It
say
found
from the
favour
outset,
with you?
It certainly did. Killing of Sacred Deer and The Lobster are both much better. It is a lot of fun though. I really went with it, and it's one of those things that I think it's been so sort of highly memed and put out there in images and GIFs and all the rest that you kind of have an expectation of what you're going to get, and it sort of messed with my expectations. It's got that classic Lanthimos extreme command of tone where he veers from this sort of slapstick stupid comedy to a sort of strange uncomfortable seriousness at times. Centered on those 3 absolutely terrific performances. A lot of people are raving about Olivia Colman, which kind of makes me think, have you not been watching her for the last entirety of her life? I have to say,
I would suspect primarily for Americans. Like
Yes,
Coleman
yeah,
has been
absolutely,
a fixture
absolutely.
of British television, and thus Irish television by sort of extension, because we import a lot of stuff. But to Americans, she is a revelation here, and I can't really fault them.
That's
for
fair. I have no problem with any of the cast, but for me, it's Rachel Weisz who was most impressive. I think she's got
the meteor role, though.
She does, yeah. She has a lot more to play with here in a way. Coleman is very comfortable in this role, although it's often quite a
difficult part to play. You know, she has to kind of come across as pathetic without being somebody who's overly, you know, deserving of sympathy at times. She does that very well, but Vice has this sort of extraordinary strength while still portraying a certain vulnerability. I had a huge amount of fun with her. I found it hilarious, gorgeous to look at. And you know, people on the supporting cast, James Smith particularly, from the thick of it, great to see, who's having a ball in his role as Prime Minister, though he wasn't actually Prime Minister, I've found in reading since. And it's the kind of film that I went off and read loads about it, because I just fell down a rabbit hole with the story. Yeah, I really enjoyed this.
All right then. But don't worry, Jay, we've got something to please you coming right up.
Finally.
At number 2, Jay Coyle is going to Stan, I believe that's what the kids call it, for Stan and Ollie.
Yes, I saw this last week. I really, really liked it. We talked about this because you'd seen it, Darren, and you were saying that it has that kind of TV kind of...
and not in a pejorative sense, but in like...
Yeah. I get that, and I absolutely see that, and the plot and structure of it doesn't really have anything kind of majorly surprising, or the arc is quite
clear from the outset.
They know exactly what they're telling, and they're telling it straight up, kind of A to B to C, and it's about what you do with that once you do that. And I think they do a lot. The performances are terrific, not only from Coogan and Riley, who are great and as good as you'd probably expect them to be, but also from Shirley Henderson and Nina Arianda, who played Lucille and Ida, who played their wives, who were, and it's been said before, said a couple of times from a few people are saying that they have almost their own kind of double act, which kind of does that. It mirrors the kind of the husband's kind of thing. And
well, that's a line from the film itself.
Yeah,
it's like two double acts for the price of one.
But it does work. It works with structurally within the film, and it's really good because generally the wives' role in these kind of films can be thankless and terrible. Not only is it well cast, the two cast members are terrific. They actually have plenty to get into, which I really liked. I'm a huge Laurel and Hardy fan. Have been for forever. So this, I knew this was kind of playing to me a little bit, and that's fine. But there's a lot of really interesting things. There's a great opening shot that kind of onto the set of their film.
Oh, it's a long take.
It's a long take kind
that
of thing.
Follows them through the Hollywood set.
Playing Hal Roach, and the kind of Stan Laurel's threatening to walk away because he wants a new kind of more control over their careers.
And Ollie's just happy to go along with everything.
He's also in the middle of a contract. They're not at the same time of contract, so there's obviously an issue. And it's this kind of thing going through it, and then they cut into the start of the scene where they're dancing, and it's a famous scene if you haven't seen it. I won't kind of say too much about it, but it's gloriously done, and it's a great setup for what they were, what they are,
and it captures the sense of what the film's going
and the cinema, and the wonder, and the kind of all the thing of it. So you get down to later where it has this kind of older, wiser, sadder kind of
duo,
tired, sore.
Reduced to playing music halls in the middle of nowhere, and the small music hall in town, as the receptionist at the hotel likes to point out.
Yeah, and a lot of comedy is physical comedy as well. So I mean, this is 60-year-olds essentially, or kind of that's where it would have been. I think at the time, they probably look a little younger in this than that, but not a huge amount younger. But there's a lot of kind of physical ailments. There's plans for a film that doesn't quite kind of come together. A Robin Hood type. Although intriguingly, it does have a little section where it shows a clip from an imagined Robin Hood film, which I quite liked as a kind of what
you want to see that
kind
movie?
of exactly.
This is the movie from their finest. This is your
exactly. That's exactly
the best version of Robin Hood that Jay saw this year.
Was in the Laurel and Hardy film, but that's really good.
Probably better than the Taron Egerton one. Let's be honest here.
Let's not lie about that. I think that's absolutely true. But what I particularly liked about it is the third act has a really lovely kind of sense of kind of sadness and kind of melancholy, and the kind of they know they're going away, they know they're yesterday's news, even whilst they're still having a little bit of a kind of on the spotlight, and it's this kind of there's a health scare, and then they come back together, and there's kind of like again there's no massive surprises in it, but there's a kind of I can't remember the line. It's like I'm really going to miss us, and he's like so are you, or something like that. It's the kind of thing, and it's really lovely, really poignant, really really well kind of acted. Like Riley and Coogan are very very good.
Well, it helps that you have two actors who can do both comedy and drama.
Yes, it really helps.
Literally the drop of a hat.
But
in some cases.
It's so well cast, though. Yeah. Like I mean, it's really good. Riley has this massive amount of makeup, which works tremendously well, particularly in movement. When he's sitting still, he can look a little
uncanny. Almost.
Yeah, but in movement, it looks absolutely fine. Like, and it looks really, really well. But I was kind of tweeting about it. It's a perfect film for Sunday afternoons, and it will be forever. Like I'll watch it probably at least a dozen times, I imagine, because it's just.
But Jay, you'll be sitting on your deathbed thinking.
Yeah, I know. But only with good films, Darren.
Hey, You can't talk until you've seen Baby Driver 12 times. Apparently.
That's true. I probably can't, but I'd heartily recommend this. This is this one of these guys. I'm probably going to see it again because I think my wife wants to see it. I might have talked her into it, so I might see it again. So
how about if I have not, for my sins, seen much Laurel and Hardy?
I think there's plenty to enjoy. It's if you've seen any kind of slapsticky kind of farce thing, any sort of sense of Hollywood kind of the Abbott Costello, Marx Brothers, anything like it's not quite the same material or same tone, but
it's very much that love letter to Hollywood. Like I would be in a similar boat. I haven't seen a lot of Laurel and Hardy outside of the very obvious stuff, and even stuff I can't remember as a kid being on television.
But I think it plays.
Yeah, like, I mean, the opening shot, as Jay pointed out, is a love letter to Hollywood. It's wandering through the back lot of a studio, watching Romans march by, and sort of like that sort of stuff. It's
Hardy kind of
waving his little tie and
that's all the
in front of the back projected screen and stuff like that. Like, if you like movies, you will probably like this.
And I'm not a mad thing. I'm not.
And I assume you like movies, Ronan.
Yeah.
So it's sort of on joy, right?
There's a thing as well, which I normally kind of really irritate the hell out of me. At the end, particularly a biopic kind of thing where you put the real people on the end and compare them, which really irritates the shit out of me in films, because it's like, we get it, you're doing a biopic, we get it, like they look
that's why we're here.
But they do a really nice one here, and I was
you mean it's based on a true story?
But he basically put a sequence side by side, which I think was tremendously well. And
so what you mean, it's like the Disaster Artist is what you're getting at?
Yeah, we'll go with that. I actually liked the Disaster Artist. I really enjoyed it, and despite never wanting or ever
going to see The Room.
I've never seen The Room, and I've no intention of ever seeing it.
But at the end, they played the scenes that Franco reconstructed.
But I liked the Disaster Artist. It made me laugh. I was surprised how much I enjoyed it, actually.
Okay.
There you go.
So if he can enjoy the Disaster Artist, surely you can enjoy.
I'm terrified what's going to come out
Ollie.
next. Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think
that one I'm okay. I thought it was going to be the Disaster.
If you have anybody that's a fan, I suggest going with them if you know anyone.
Yeah,
because
I
think Jay is lining up a third visit.
That might be in a sneaky way of saying that, but it'll brought a tear to my eye. I can absolutely see that working. It's lovely. It's really lovely.
All right, and at number one, surprising absolutely nobody, having earned €2.8 million at the Irish box office to date, Mary Poppins returns to the number one spot.
Yeah, okay, I haven't seen it. I heard it's okay.
It's grand. It's very much, it is in many ways like a shot-for-shot sort of remake of the original in terms of it goes through the sequences that you expect it to have. Now, to be fair, the sequences from the original are very episodic. It reminds me a lot of, remember when Disney did Fantasia for 2000, where they rotated out certain sequences and rotated in others, but retained the core aspect of it. So you have another sequence where the characters interact with like animation because that's expected and stuff like that. You have another sequence in which they encounter street urchins in London, except this time they aren't doing chimney, they're lamplighters, and they're lighting the lamps around London, saying leave a little lamp on or something.
We don't see enough street urchins anymore, I have to say.
I have to say, but what sort of jars me a little bit with Mary Poppins, what sort of really took me out of it, was the sense that you had this interesting return, and I sort of talked about it I think last week, this return towards spectacle, which is kind of akin to what Bohemian Rhapsody does in its final act with Live Aid, where it's like you're trying to produce something in cinema that is equivalent to going to see a show. So this is very much a vaudeville style musical of the kind that was popular in the 50s and even early 60s. But you're doing that while you're also paying heed to the conventions of modern cinema. So, for example, in that like leave a little lamp on sequence, which is absolutely beautiful to be clear, they have the urchins riding bikes like they're BMX stuntmen. Ramping up things and jumping off things and doing little wheelies in the air, because you can tell that somebody at the studio is like, kids like bikes, right? And there's a moment at the end where, like, again, this is a Mary Poppins movie. There's never going to be real stakes in a Mary Poppins movie, but they have to scale Big Ben in order to stop the clock from striking midnight in order to get the money to the bank in time. And doing this, right, keep in mind, Mary Poppins flies. She has an umbrella that allows her to fly. This is not a complicated situation, but the film goes out of its way to create this sort of high-stakes, Vertigo-esque sort of like sequence in which the lamplights try to bounce and try to like parkour their way up Big Ben, sort of almost tripping off. There's a moment where one of them balances on a plank and almost falls to his death. And it's like, this is a sequence that doesn't belong in the movie that you pitched, because this is a no-stakes movie, essentially, you know? And you're trying to insert this weird life and death thing, which doesn't even work. I suspect because people expect that modern audiences expect that. This is the weird hybrid that you get.
It self-perpetuates, though, doesn't it, surely?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing, is that I wonder if this is like halfway between like where we are now, which is like where spectacle is watching Superman level like Metropolis in CGI, and getting towards something that is more like, again, like the 50s. You know, remember when they introduced that like widescreen, super widescreen sort of thing? What was the Paramount one? VistaVision, that's the one. Where they introduced this sort of, and you know, and I mean, we've had this argument about like 3D, for example, going back to smell-o-vision and stuff like that, and how cinema's competing. And I wonder if if we are moving back towards spectacle, this is like a halfway measure between that. Where this is like, okay, you can do like a vaudeville-style musical, and the book is not the cover, which is the musical number that they do in the animated world, is absolutely stunning. Like, it would be, take it out of the film, it would be one of my favorite sequences of last year.
Okay.
But in the context of the film, it doesn't really do anything. That sort of stuff, you know?
Okay.
But yeah, so if you like,
not sold,
if you like BMS and BMXs, and you like people almost falling off Big Ben, but you also like musical numbers and old-fashioned animation, then Mary Poppins Returns may just be for you.
It might be extremely niche-y.
There's a very target market, that's sort of in that intersecting Venn diagram.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's move on to the new releases. Only 3 new releases this week.
Okay.
It's a very light week because we're in the middle of January. Also because the Oscar nominations are next week and a lot of studios are hedging. So, opening this week is Amazon's Beautiful Boy.
Oh, just the one you told me about that was hilariously bad.
It's fascinating and has one of my favorite sequences of the year. But yeah,
I might watch this because
of that sequence.
Because you're very good at making me watch
Yeah,
things.
you really do describe these things in the kind of detail that makes you want to see them.
Let's just give the brief introduction. It's based on 2 memoirs. Beautiful Boy, which is written by the journalist David Schiff, and Tweak, which is written by his son Nick Schiff. And the idea is...
Son Nietzsche.
Yeah. Nietzsche's Tweak. But it's basically the story of a boy who is succumbing to crystal meth addiction, and his father who's trying to help him get off it while managing his own obligations to his existing family members and the push and pull that exists between them. The issue with the film, or what makes the film at once interesting and infuriating, is the fact that it is essentially 3 films sutured together. The first of those films is your standard... okay, well let's start with the easy stuff. It's the Give Me an Oscar film for Steve Carell, which involves lots of shouting on the phone, particularly at his ex-wife, where he's like, "I'm trying to help him! Why can't I help him?" And continuing ad nauseum like that. There's lots of really strong emotive scenes where you can tell that they're like, this is going to be the Oscar clip. This is the clip we're going to show at the Golden Globes when Steve Carell gets nominated.
I saw the trailer for this last night. There's a lot of that in the trailer.
Yeah.
The trailer is 2 minutes of shouting, and it makes it look insufferable, because I'm sure a lot of people disagree with me here. I don't think Steve Carell can do that kind of shouty drama. He does shouty comedy really well in The Office all the time. When he does it, and maybe it's because I've watched so much of his comedy, when he does it in drama, it just looks ridiculous. Always.
You can't unsee
Michael Scott in that, I think.
Which is great, the Michael Scott spin-off that nobody knew they wanted. So that's 1/3 of the film. And it doesn't quite work. But what it also doesn't work is trying to blend that third of the film with a third of the film that is the Sundance Indie. Which is
worst.
Oh yeah,
nightmare.
Which is full of lots of scenes of people driving around listening to music that expresses what the plot would normally express through acting, dialogue, or directorial choices.
Ideally with acoustic guitars.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it spoils absolutely nothing to say that there might be a John Lennon song in this movie, perhaps called "Beautiful Boy," if you will. And there's a lot of that in there. There's a lot of like synth heavy Brian Eno stuff in there. And it doesn't really work because you're also doing the shouty stuff. So you get this weird tonal mismatch between the two. But where the movie really, really comes into its own. And this is the part where I'm kind of like, I admire this. And it's kind of like, I'm so into this. I'm there. I really appreciate that you went to this. It's like, you don't see this that much anymore. And it becomes this like 2019 reefer madness film about crystal meth. And let's be being entirely honest, it's a very serious problem. Addiction is terrible, and I mean, in the United States there is a crisis happening at the moment, and it's very important to deal with these things in film and to address them. It is probably not the best way to do that by having what can only be described as an ominous dirge research montage in which Steve Carell sits at his computer in his office in his home, having turned the lights off for atmosphere apparently, where he can be basked in the neon glow of the screen. Intense close-up of his face, a worried brow. Intense close-up of the screen, which is showing a picture of brain. Now, we're not neurosurgeons, but we know that pictures of brains don't mean good things. On the soundtrack, a synthesizer rises ominously. We cut quickly to him in an office with a doctor saying, I don't know how to tell you this. We cut quickly back to him scrolling, his eyes widening. The image is reflected in the glasses as sweat drips down his brow. We cut to a moment where a surgeon is speaking to him with an MRI image of a human brain. There are 4 red circles. The surgeon points to it with a pen, makes little circles in the air around those circles and says, you see these red spots here? The amygdala. It's screaming. And the synth rises again, as if to say, this is what the amygdala is saying. And it continues like this, unapologetically, for like a solid 3 minutes. It's staggering. Like, it's proper, like, hardcore moral panic stuff. And come on, tell me you're not...
I really am, but why is this a thing?
I want to see this film.
Yeah,
Does it have like an extreme close-up of his finger scrolling on the mouse? Because that sounds like the territory we're in.
There's a moment where, like, when he's calling his ex-wife to announce that he's decided that he can't continue to talk, like, he has to draw a line somewhere with Nick, he's standing on the edge of a cliff as what only sounds like Conad plays on the soundtrack. This rising, despairing sort of like funeral choral music playing as he sort of bids his son, who he can't see in this scene, farewell across this vast ocean. Yeah, it's staggering.
We're not surprised this hasn't factored in award season then.
No, but again, absolutely amazing. Like that meth montage is like one of my favorite scenes of the year, completely unironically, because it just goes for it. Completely goes for it. Yeah. It's like, there's literally a moment where the doctor says to him, now, drugs are bad, but meth is the worst. And it's like, this is, yeah, okay, whoa. And the film just goes. It just never stops.
How long is it?
That'll
factor into whether I'll actually see it.
I think it's about 2 hours long, unfortunately.
I might have to watch this. I think I'm going to watch this.
All right.
But this makes top 10 next week.
It might sneak in. Channel A has a very strong following. Yeah,
I'm going to watch it. I'll have watched it next week.
All right. So, also opening this week, I haven't seen this one. I'm actually quite interested. I may see this one before the next podcast if I can. Glass.
I won't see this.
I really liked Unbreakable years ago. I haven't seen it since. Split. It was hokey in the extreme, but I kind of liked it. I did burst out laughing at the cinema in that final reveal, which set up Glass. And it was one of those things where I think a lot of people didn't get it. So I burst out laughing in the cinema, and everyone was kind of like, what? Yeah. Nobody else in the cinema seemed to have an idea what was happening here.
Person I saw it with, when that reveal happens at the end of the movie, which, again, I feel like we can spoil given it's the premise of this movie, is Bruce Willis shows up. Somebody who was with me at the cinema turned to me and said... Does that mean James McAvoy was dead all along?
Outstanding,
excellent.
But yeah, we've had Glass has generated some polarizing opinions.
It's generated a lot more than that.
Yeah, like Graham from our site really likes it and has sort of recommended it. Places like Vulture Online seem to really hate it, and there's a bit of push and pull between it. I think the AV Club was like. The AV Club at one point likens Shyamalan to Hitchcock in terms of his composition, and then is like, yeah, but if only he could write
or direct.
I like that he's like Hitchcock, but he just can't write or direct. He's got a great sense of humor. Yeah, he's got a great sense of humor. So yeah, I might try and see this for next week.
I'm probably not going to see this.
If, it was there in front of me, I probably would. I don't know if I'll go out of my way to see this, but I'm kind of curious.
I would actually want you to see it.
Yeah, more
so that I don't have to.
More than anything, I want to rewatch Unbreakable because I really like that many years ago.
It's very good. I adored Unbreakable.
I rewatched it a few years ago. It actually stands up.
Does it stand up?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
It's one of the better superhero movies in large part because it's one of the better Shyamalan movies because its twist is conceptual rather than literal, rather than plot based. Anyway, so the final release and probably the big release of the week in terms of Irish cinemas, it is Josie O'Rourke's Mary Queen of Scots. Don't be fooled by the rocks that she got. She's still Mary Queen of Scots.
That was a tough one.
That was a tough one.
It's been a long podcast.
I don't know. I think that Grace described this as having J-Lo in it, which she uses to refer to Jack Lawrence.
Okay.
But I just couldn't get the. I had to make a number of leaps to get there. But I think I got got there in the end. Mary, Queen of Scots, which is not good.
I saw the trailer for this and I was like, yeah, I'm probably not going to see this.
Bit of a hard pass.
Yeah, I think so.
Because I should be all in for this. It's Saoirse Ronan, fresh from the success on the indie scene with movies like Brooklyn and movies like Lady Bird, which have done phenomenally well, stepping into like this period drama, which is one of the adult film genres that still exists to a certain form. It looks old-fashioned. It looks like the kind of movies that they're doing in the old days. In fact, the subject matter explicitly suggests Elizabeth and Elizabeth the Golden Age, which are probably two of my favorite period dramas of the past 30 years at this point. Wow. But it just gets so much wrong. It's got like, the issue is, there are several issues, but the one that really stands out is the headliner, which is the fact that it is a two-hander between Margot Robbie and Saoirse Ronan, in which the two actors only share a single scene, which is heavily featured in the trailers, but is the penultimate scene of the film. Also, it looks like they had Saoirse Ronan on board. I don't know the history of this as it was produced, but watching it, you get a sense that it was conceived as a biography of Mary, Queen of Scots, Mary Stuart.
Which makes more sense.
Which makes more sense, yeah. But somehow along the way, Margot Robbie either was interested or was talked into it.
And he just hastily kind of cobbled something.
And then
together.
they hastily cobbled a subplot together involving Elizabeth I, which is insane because it has no real involvement to anything that's happening in the plot. Mary Stuart is dealing with insurrection in Scotland. She's dealing with the men and the church.
That's the film,
and her own,
right?
Yeah, and her own family plotting against her. And you're constantly cutting back to, like, the palace where, they're like, oh, there seems to be unrest happening in Scotland. You should probably do something about that, Queen Elizabeth. She's like, yes, I probably should. And then we cut back to Mary and her family going through their sort of strife. And it's really strange because there is a story to tell about Mary and Elizabeth, if anybody knows their history, which is the story that, Mary, after she was ousted from Scotland, had to come down and seek comfort and sort of like, seek sanctuary with her cousin, Elizabeth, and then was implicated in a plot to execute Elizabeth. Now, there's some debate, I believe, with historians about how involved Mary was in that plot to execute Elizabeth. But, that's the story that you tell. That's if you're telling a story about Mary and Elizabeth, that's where the meat of your story is. Mary, Queen of Scots covers that in one sentence in its epilogue, in a montage. It is horribly, horribly ill-judged. It is a movie that pitched itself as a feminist movie, but horribly ill-judged. To give an example, the hashtag for the movie is Dear Sister. As a feminist sort of empowering slogan. It's like, Dear Sister, and tell us something you did that was empowering with your fellow women. Ignoring the fact that A, these two women were cousins, not sisters, and B, one of these women had the other beheaded after she was accused of trying to assassinate her. But the film has these really weird sexual politics running through it, where the future of Scotland is apparently determined by the fact that Mary meets a guy who performs oral sex on her. But there's also even things like the plot involving Elizabeth, where it's repeatedly suggested that of the two women who are apparently competing against each other, even though they're not interacting with each other. The difference between Mary and Elizabeth is that Elizabeth doesn't have kids. And there's this really weird composition from Josie Rourke. It's a beautiful shot. It's a cut from the bloodstained sheets after Mary's given birth to a sequence of sort of quilling that has been done by Elizabeth. And the implication of that shot is, look at Elizabeth and how sad she is. She's an old woman stitching stuff up. If only she had a son. The epilogue of the movie consists of, Elizabeth did have, Mary killed, but, joke's on Elizabeth because she didn't have a kid. And guess whose kid rose to the throne afterwards? Yeah, probably should have had kids. It's really, really regressive and old-fashioned and outdated, and its politics are just odious and horrible. And you feel really bad. You feel bad for Saoirse Ronan because she's stuck in that thing where she's great in these movies, like Lady Bird in Brooklyn, for example, but she seems to struggle a little bit when she gets into the sort of bigger stuff, The Host, for one example, The Lovely Bones. And I don't think she has the problem with either of those, but it's maybe a choice that she makes when she's working on the material. But you feel really, really bad for Margot Robbie, who has,
That was a thankless.
It's a thankless role. And she's trying really hard, but she has to deliver lines like, I was so jealous of you. You had everything that I didn't have. Beauty. Love. Motherhood. And you're like, why? Why? You have Margot Robbie, Saoirse Ronan. You have a period setting. You have this cast I mean, the actor who comes out best, and it's probably because he seems to understand where the movie's pitching itself, is David Tennant, who hams it up as John Knox, saying lines like, there's a plague on our land, a woman with a crown, as if he's saying Daleks on Doctor Who, the same contempt in his voice. It's not a good movie, and it really should be. It should be impossible to mess this up to the extent that this is messed up. I cannot account for it.
Yeah, I'm past. I'm out.
I was never going near it.
No, probably not. The trailer would suggest all was not good, I would say.
All right, then. So if people are looking for a bit more Jay, a bit more Ronan in their lives, where can they find you guys?
At Jay Coyle on Twitter.
I am on Twitter talking about my upcoming watch of United Passions at Baron Ronan. That may or may not
One
be
over
true.
Gotti!
That may or may not be true.
Over Gotti. Suck it, Gotti.
I would probably sooner watch Gotti.
What?
You should.
Oh.
You should.
Why,
I want the
why choose?
Travolta.
Why choose?
Yeah, true. Watch them both simultaneously.
I want to see it.
You can follow me at Darren_Mooney. I also co-host another podcast called The 250, where we talk about the top 250 movies of all time. This weekend, we're talking about a new entry on the list. At number 26, it is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Joining us for that, we have, yes, the 26th best movie of all time, and rising.
IMDb.
What?
Per IMDb.
Per-
Not an objective analysis, just in case anyone thinks that exists.
But yes, so objectively the 26th best movie of all time. But joining us for that, we have the great Luke Dunn and Graham Day, who've both been on this podcast. And Brie Martin is also joining us, so we're very, very excited about that. So that should be out sometime on Saturday. Until then, take it easy, guys. Bye.
Bye.